And stations now, the final time check before the start of hour number one of The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown. 30 seconds until hour number one from Mark. That was our final verbal time check for The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown. We'll have a long tone at 10 seconds before, followed by a short one at 5 seconds. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Boy, we've got 2 interviews today. You do not want to miss a minute of the broadcast.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Did you ever wonder what happens to someone who has sex change surgery, one of the most radical things you could do or have done to yourself? What happens to someone who has sex change surgery only to regret it and think, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake? We've got a guest that will be joining us at the bottom of the hour today who has gone through that very story and knows many others who have as well. But first, we're going to ask a very major question. Why is it, when it comes to world-changing strategy, that the church often seems to be reacting to what the world does, and often reacting sometimes a year too late, sometimes a generation too late? I have a guest who claims that the West, including America, is moving towards totalitarianism, a takeover of even the thoughts that we think and the words that we say. Is he exaggerating? Welcome, friends, to the broadcast. Michael Brown, delighted to be with you. Here's the number to call, 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-3487-884. I'm not going to be taking a lot of time for calls because I want to devote maximum time to our guests. My first guest is a friend and colleague, Tom Gilson, senior editor with The Stream, author or editor of a number of books. One of them very important. Well, they're all important. One of them, Critical Conversations, a Christian's Parents' Guide to Discussing Homosexuality with Teens. Yes, such a book exists. Another, he was the editor of this, True Reason, Christian Responses to the Challenge of Atheism. So Tom Gilson is a thinking man, is a strategist. He has a brand new article up on The Stream. We're going to be posting a link for it a little bit later. Church, Wake Up, an Urgent Call to Action. Hostility toward Christ in the church is turning totalitarian, even in America. What can we realistically do? Tom, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Glad to do it. So, Tom, you are not one of these alarmist type people, Chicken Little, the sky's falling, running around with your hands thrown up, and yet you're putting out an urgent call for action. Could you paint a picture for us of why things are so urgent?
Yeah, it's something that it surprises me that the church isn't more aware of and actually responding to. We'll get into this later on. It might be that they don't know how to respond, but there is some very totalizing action going on from the LGBT crowd in particular. It's not just LGBT. You can see it in things like Antifa and some other freedom from religion kinds of action. But it's the kind of thing where people are requiring Christians to violate conscience or to lose their jobs, their businesses. In one case, I know of that they've almost lost their homes. And the most recent one, the one that really woke me up for this to write this article, was in West Point, Virginia, small town. I've been through there many times. And a teacher there named Peter Lumming was fired for using the wrong pronoun with a trans person. Yeah. And he said, look, I'll call this person by the name they want me to call. And I'll just avoid pronouns altogether, but I can't use a pronoun that I don't think is true. and that wasn't good enough.
Mm.
The school board said, "Look, you have got to do it the way the trans people want, or else you're out of here," and he was fired. That's totalitarianism. There's no compromise. There's no room for conscience. There's no room for any kind of disagreement. You have to do it their way. This kind of thing is on the rise, and the church is asleep to it.
Yeah, so I mean, people are being told what language they have to use. The bill passed in Canada that basically makes it national law. So if Tom now says he's Tammy, and I don't refer to him as Tammy, and then refer to him as she, or if Mike is now Michelle, and you don't refer to me as such, in New York City, you can get a $250,000 fine. Where if a man identifies as a woman, you say, I have a problem with you using the women's bathroom, you can get a $250,000 fine in the workplace. And then we have now state after state is passing laws that if you are struggling with same-sex attraction or gender identity confusion and want professional counseling, or you're a 17-year-old and with your parents say, I want to get professional counseling, it is illegal to get help or counseling. So that is totalitarian. We're not exaggerating in saying that.
Yeah, I don't want to be an alarmist. Like you said, I want to be sane thinking about this, but I think there is only one sane way to look at this, which is to say, the world has changed. We don't want the world to have changed. Hallmark movies are getting a lot more play, a lot more audience this Christmas, I've heard recently, and it's because people want things to be the way they used to be, but you can't make them the way they used to be by watching Hallmark Christmas movies. The world has changed, and we have got to wake up to it.
Now, in your article, and friends, if you haven't read it, it's up on the stream, Church, Wake Up. In the article, you say Apple is poised to enforce a new morality. Why did you say that?
Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has said that it's pretty much a corporation's responsibility to enforce, or to hold the line on what's allowed on their platforms. And, of course, he's a leader that other top tech organizations are going to be listening to as well. And basically what they're saying is, well, you've lost lost the word here myself. You've lost the ability to advertise on YouTube. Other people have been kicked off of Twitter for no good reason at all. And big corporations are saying, we're in charge. We're deciding what's moral. That's just a recent statement by Tim Cook, where he said, yeah, we're taking a stand for that.
Yeah, so, when you hear it, oh, good, you're going to stand against hate speech. So if some guy is inciting hatred against Black Americans or Jewish Americans, and you got a Nazi on your staff and they want to spread propaganda, you're not going to let that happen. It sounds good until you realize that in the eyes of these companies, we are Nazis. We are the KKK. We are the evil ones. So here, Apple, with their massive platforms, would not allow the Manhattan Declaration to put their app on Apple. So you just think that this was something Chuck Colson's organization, others put together, many of us involved, signing on to the statement, just a good statement about family, morality, life. That got banned. And yet you could have every kind of perverse sex thing and hook up with strangers, and all. That's perfectly fine. You could have Christian bashing material. That's fine. So we have been designated the haters, and therefore we have to be silenced. And you're getting more and more people, conservatives and others, they're getting kicked off Twitter. They're getting deplatformed on Facebook. They're getting kicked off Patreon. They can't. So it's pretty much, you don't exist. We're going to snuff you out. And even if you have some extreme things that we all reject.
If we did, I think that the LGBT and other progressive movement is being led by a relatively small group of people. They are well positioned. They have considerable power in terms of the microphone in the country. But when you consider the church, what we have got an absolutely ridiculously massive ground organization. It's called church.
Yep.
We've got millions of people everywhere. And if we thought strategically, if we thought that we could do something, if we realized what we could do, nothing could stand. Christ said the gates of hell will not stand against the church. Well, the church has got to be moving toward those gates in order for the gates to even be bothered by them, by us.
Yeah,
and we haven't been. We're not deploying. We're not equipping. It might be, and I'm sure it is to a great extent, the fact that we're not totally sold out to Christ. We're not totally sold out to doing the radical biblical thing. But even beyond that, it's that we don't know what we would do if we were going to do something.
Yeah, so part of it is we've been producing consumers rather than disciples. So people just have the mentality of make my life bigger and better and easier. That's what church is for, rather than equipping an army of disciples to go out sacrificially as world changers. So we reap the negative fruit of that. But then, yeah, again, a lot of times it's kind of paralyzing. Like, what do I do? What do I tackle? It's so big, it's so massive, and yet, as you said, we have just existing. We don't have to do anything. It's there. The biggest grassroots movement in America any week. Right. It's not people going to a football game or people going to the movies, or it's people gathering to worship the Lord. So we have the grassroots people. So I want to break this down. Again, friends, go to the stream and we'll post the link as soon as the show's over. Again, the article by Tom Gilson, Church Wake Up, an urgent call to action. We've just got about a minute before the first break, but we're going to break down some of the strategies. Where do we start? What do we do first?
Yeah, well, I think an attitude that we need to have in mind is that the revolution we're experiencing now was a long time in coming. It goes back to at least the 1969. The big strategy documents you can identify now go back to 1987 when they decided what they were going to do. They did it. It's been a 30-year plus process since then. It's been slow, and we need to take a slow, long look at what we can do over the decades too. And that's the way we're going to make change if we really take it in hand to do that.
So in other words, we have to think long term. If our mentality is, well, we're out of here any minute because Jesus is coming any second, there's a good chance we're not going to have a good strategy for our kids or our grandkids. All right, so friends, we're going to be right back with Tom Gilson. We're going to break down some of these strategies, but how about starting with, let's wake up to reality. We pray for everyone. We want to see LGBT people come to the Lord. They're our friends, neighbors, coworkers, family members. We're talking about an agenda, though, that's going to undermine our most foundational liberties. First thing, wake up. Second thing, think about a lasting strategy and not just a reaction to the moment. We'll be right back. Is Satan everywhere at the same time? Is the devil omnipresent? I see no scriptural emphasis on that or no scriptural backing for that whatsoever. God alone is omnipresent. Angels are not omnipresent. Created beings are not omnipresent. And Satan is both a created being and an angel, a fallen created being, a fallen angel. You know, in Matthew, the 4th chapter, Matthew chapter 4, verse 11, after Jesus is being tempted in the wilderness, it says this, "Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him." So Satan left, angels came. Neither of them are omnipresent. Just because Satan is a spirit being, and we can't see him, you can have the feeling, well, he's omnipresent. No, only God fills the universe. Only, as it said of God in Psalm 139, where can I go from your spirit? Only of God, as it says in Jeremiah 23, that he fills heaven and earth. It's not said of Satan. Satan is not omnipresent. Satan is a powerful, dark, spiritual being, very powerful, very deceptive, and he has a well-organized army of demon powers under him, whether those are fallen angels or wherever we get the class of demons from, and they are sent out. And when we resist demons, we are resisting Satan. When it tells us in 1 Peter 5 to resist Satan, it doesn't mean that each of us is personally resisting him because he's everywhere at the same time. No, he comes and he goes. Just like in Matthew, the 4th chapter, he leaves and looks for more opportune time. Satan is not omnipresent. Let's not give him credit he doesn't deserve. Only God is almighty. Only God is omniscient. Only God is omnipresent. Absolutely not Satan.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to The Line of Fire. Michael Brown, so glad to have this time with my friend and colleague, Tom Gilson. I just tweeted out a link to his article, Church Wake Up, an urgent call to action, and we'll post it on our Facebook page immediately after the show. So again, what do we need to wake up to? We need to wake up to an increase in totalitarianism coming our way, where our most fundamental liberties are being challenged, undermined. They have been for some years now. It's only intensifying. And Tom, when God called me in 2004 to begin to get involved with LGBT issues, the T word wasn't even a big issue then, but especially with gay activism, and then began to break my heart to reach out to the people with love, I asked myself, well, why me? Why is God calling me to get involved with this? You know, Jewish ministry, that makes sense. I'm Jewish and got the education and other things, you know, that are part of my background. But I don't come out of homosexuality. I never had a particular burden to minister to those that struggle with same-sex attraction or sexual brokenness in general. My PhD is in Semitic languages, not in psychology and I thought, why me? Then I realized this is the big issue that this generation is going to face. And it's basically a matter of everybody. We need everybody, you know, all hands. Everybody's got to get involved. So this has been one of these unavoidable things. It's not that we went looking for this. You've got a million other things in ministry important to you and dealing with atheists and college campuses and all this. And yet you're in the thick of this as well. So this is unavoidable. And that's why you wrote a book addressing teens as well.
Right. And it's the same reason. It's because this is where we are under pressure. This is where we've got the media attack. And it's not gays and lesbians and trans people in general. It's the activists among them.
Yeah.
And I want to keep that distinction clear. It's activism that's pressing on us, and not everyone's involved in it, including friends of mine that I'm not talking about when I have raised this alarm. But there are some who are pushing, and their effect is that they are making it appear that Christianity is wrong and evil.
Yep.
So that when you consider young people deciding whether they're going to commit their lives to Christ, the question used to be, do I want to do this? Is it true? And now the question, more than ever before, is, do I want to do this? Is this good? Do I want to be part of this bigoted group as it's been presented to me? And so we have got to answer that question, because it is the question. But now too, it's extended beyond that to where they're telling us what we have to do, whether we want to or not.
Yeah, and
but I like too that
ahead.
That you're taking a real strategic approach when you think of this as being an important issue. Churches have got to think strategically.
I had a pastor on with me yesterday who had recently talked to George Barna, and he was a megachurch pastor for years. And he met Barna. He said, "Oh, you're the guy I don't like. You always put out these negative polls and things." And of course, Barna had polled pastors and found that like 90% of American pastors had said that they didn't address the controversial issues. And when he asked why, he said, well, fear of losing people, fear of losing influence, fear of losing finances. So Barna expected when he asked them a question again, that's what he would get. But he told this pastor that I was speaking with yesterday, Pastor Mike Hayes, he said, what I'm finding the principal reason is they're not speaking out is because they don't know what to say. And I could understand it on the one hand. This was all new to me to get into these issues and dig deep into the social things and begin to confront them, and many things I wanted to do rather than that. So your average pastor, they're up to their neck already. You know, just counseling a couple that is on the edge of divorce and working with the teens in the youth group, getting a strong youth pastor in and balancing the budget and paying the bills and all this. But the fact is there are plenty of resources. And that's what Pastor Hayes was saying. There are plenty of resources so that you don't have to do it all yourself. Let's pool together, work together, educate together. So You say the first and the second thing we need to do in the strategy is tell the whole truth. What do you mean?
Yeah, the first thing I said there, tell the whole truth, is let your congregation know that this is happening. Let them know that we're at risk. Let them know that there's a totalitarian influence in the culture that is going to affect their lives, their spiritual lives, their kids' lives. Tell the whole truth. And by the way, the early church did that. Read the church fathers. They didn't shy from it. This is not a bad thing to spend time on in church. But tell the whole truth. God is still God. This is not Chicken Little. The sky is falling. God knows how to hold the sky up. Jesus Christ saved the church for all time. That includes you and me. But we still got a responsibility in Christ. He calls people to lead, to take action. We can move forward with hope and with joy, but we better move forward.
And so we preach with a sense of faith and yet with urgency, that people understand what's happening, to wake up, not in the sense of fear and panic, but in a sense of we better do something or there's going to be accountability. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said the ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to our children. And I mentioned this on the air yesterday as well, that I've been interacting with someone, known her pretty much her whole life or most of her life. And she's now got a daughter, she and her husband. The girl's 15 and is not at home with her body and being female and wants to identify as male. And she's in a school, a very liberal school. And the parents met with the counselor and they said, oh, yeah, we're about to notify the entire school to call her by male names. And I was like, well, where are the parents here? She's a confused young lady. She has other issues. The school is ready to run with this. And in many cases, the school would run with it. And the parent doesn't even know that Jane that you send from the house is Joe at school and called he by the teachers. You didn't even know this. That's where we're at. Therefore, we sound the alarm. So we tell the whole truth. We let people know what's happening. We do it in faith. We tell them the truth about God. What else do we do?
Yeah. The next thing is we need to expect that we are going to come under pressure. Some of us, very much pressure personally. And so that's when we need the reminder that Jesus is still God. He still lives. He was born on Christmas. He died on Good Friday. He rose again. We need to stand for him, live for him, to teach his entire truth, all of it. And if pressure comes on me, I will live for Christ. I will die for Christ. I am staying with Jesus. He is the greatest man of all history. He is God in the flesh, died for me, rose for me. I am never going to back down from my belief in him. And pastors, I think we need to be preparing our people at some point. I don't know if it's 1 year, 2 year, 10 years. I think we need to be preparing our people to make that stand, because some of us are going to have to do it. And I don't know which one, but some of us are.
Yeah, you know, what I hear you saying is, church, make disciples. Because this is just being a normal disciple. I was just in India for my 25th time earlier in the month, Tom. And every year we participate in water baptisms there that the ministry does. And my friend that does the water baptisms, Brother Yesu Padam, who's been stoned and has had some of his pastors martyred, when they do water baptisms, so this is entry level. After they ask for the confession of faith, they then say, he asked them, are you willing to follow Jesus to your last breath, to your last drop of blood? And they say yes, very soberly, because they understand that that's reality. They may be kicked out of the family. They may get persecuted physically. Their house may be burned down. They may get killed. That's the gospel.
And thank you for that reminder that this is normal. We have lived in an abnormal period in the West for the last, I don't know, couple of 300 years, maybe longer. And when Christianity wasn't the way Jesus said it would be, where the world would hate us, that's abnormal. We're returning to normal, but we need to live according to what Jesus taught, all of it.
Yeah, and you know, as you say that, Tom, it triggers something in me. I may even write about it. America had a lot of Christian roots in its founding. Of course, we're never a perfectly Christian country, but a lot of gospel, biblical principles in our founding. And there was a strong Christian influence in our nation. And because of that strong Christian influence, there was not the level of persecution that you'd normally have because there was such a strong Christian base. And even if all the founders were not really Christians, they had an appreciation for Christianity or for the Bible. That's why the northern states outlawed slavery. That's why slavery is ultimately abolished. This is the fruit of Christian roots. But what's happened is, as we prospered more, as we become more complacent, more diverse, the reason we don't have persecution now is not so much because of our Christian roots, but because of our worldliness and complacency, that we're so much like the world, we don't get persecuted. But if we stand up and do what's right and honor the Lord and act ethically, these days there will be opposition. And to not prepare is to be negligent as a shepherd.
Right. And one of the ways we need to prepare our pastors, we need to lead in prayer. We need to equip our people with answers. And that's another one for pastors are worried that they don't have what they need.
Yep.
But they can there are resources, and one of those resources often is a member of your church who is just dying for a chance to teach. And if you've got someone in your church who's oriented towards apologetics, towards worldview, ethical issues, get to build whatever it takes to build the confidence you need, but get that person equipped and unleashed to do that for your people because your people need it. It doesn't have to be the pastor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there are other people, they want to do the research, or they want to be in front of the abortion clinic, or they want to be reaching out here, or a businessman wants to make a difference. So friends, read the article. It lays out 6 basic strategies. Church, wake up, an urgent call to action. It's up on the stream. And this is just the beginning. Obviously, Tom and I have been working in these areas for many years now, but it's at the point now where the alarm needs to be sounded more clearly, more loudly, more strenuously, with practical steps folks can take. So, Tom, keep up the great work. We will continue this conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. We come back, we'll speak with a man who had sex change surgery and regretted it.
When you purchase...
You often hear the term biblical worldview. But what is a biblical worldview? Okay, a worldview is how we look at the world, how we look at moral, cultural issues, how we look at life, okay? If we were animals, we don't have a worldview. We're surviving, and some animals eat other animals, and other animals run from other animals, and you don't have a worldview, but we have a worldview. We put value on things. We believe things are right and wrong, and our worldview is based on the Bible being true. Our worldview is based on God creating us in His image, there being right and wrong in His sight, there being absolute moral value. So to have a biblical worldview is to look at the world, to look at culture, to look at family, to look at relationships, to look at decisions we make through the lens of Scripture and through the perspective that we will give account to God and that we live and walk with God here in this world. Now, Paul says something very interesting in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He's talking about the life he once lived, how he once looked at people. Now that he meets Jesus, look at what he says, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 16. He said, "From now on, though, having come to know Jesus and being born from above, therefore we regard no one according to the flesh," meaning just on a human level. "Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer." So in other words, he's saying, I once looked at Jesus just in natural terms and didn't realize who he was and completely misjudged him. So if I meet someone, whether it's the President of the United States or a beggar on the street, that's someone created in the image of God who needs Jesus. If I look at some Hollywood celebrity, that's like, oh, can I have your I want to have your autograph. No, rather, how can I lead you to really know the Lord? Because you're a person like everybody else. I'm going to have a different perspective on people, a different perspective on this world, a different perspective on life in the womb, a different perspective on right and wrong. And here's what's interesting. A massive, overwhelming percentage of millennials, I mean, the vast majority, according to polls, do not have a biblical worldview. I mean, like 98, 99% from what I've read, don't have a biblical worldview. Why? Well, obviously, many have not been nurtured in it through their parents, okay? The parents have not done an adequate job of grounding their kids in the Word and in a biblical worldview. Or maybe we're just so narrow, quoted the Bible here and there, but never applied it to all of life. And they haven't had that encounter with Jesus that Paul had. I don't mean on the same level, but that same recognition of not looking at things through natural eyes. Many have a heart for justice and want to see good, but they don't get the larger perspective, God's perspective, because of which their worldview is limited through an encounter.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Well, you know, you hear all the time, you see it all the time, it's everywhere, how wonderful it is when people have sex change surgery and what relief they find and how they're living a fulfilled and great life now, and it was terrible before. And I'm sure that that is the story of some, that they will say, well, I was suicidal before, and now my life is so much better, and I'm a well-adjusted person now, and I'm not denying those stories. What I am saying is you only hear those stories and you don't hear a ton of other stories that tell you, well, actually, there are plenty of people who have sex change surgery that are just as suicidal after as before. And there are plenty of people that actually experience what's called sex change regret. So we have the opportunity now to speak to a courageous man, Walt Heyer. He had sex change surgery. He, quote, became a woman. He lived as a woman, only to realize that he did not treat the root of his problems. How do you transition back after that? What do you do? And are there other people like him experiencing sex change regret? Walt has been, you may have seen him on the news, all kinds of secular news. You may have read his articles that have gone viral. One of them was even used at a briefing in the White House to discuss some of these issues. His newest book, Trans Life Survivors. So, Walt, it is such a joy to have you back on the air. 74 years old, still going strong for the cause. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, Dr. Brown, thank you so much for allowing me to come on and share this time with you. It's so important.
Yeah, it is very important. So, first, people who don't know your story, just in short, because I want to devote time to talking about the others that have gone through things like you. Did you really feel when you thought you had to be a woman, and here you are, married, children, whatever your situation is, did you feel that you had to do it, that you had, it was that, or you're going to lose your mind, and this was the thing that was going to bring you wholeness?
Yeah, you know, that's such a great question. I think, yes, but the real problem, Dr. Brown, is that there was no one there that had a different voice that you could bring into the conversation. It was just one line of thinking. And I'm trying to bring a second track of thinking into this to help people understand that the consequences of doing this are often quite disastrous. And so when I transitioned and had the surgery and so forth 35 years ago, there wasn't any other voice. And that's what has inspired me, not only through my relationship with Christ, but just in my relationship with people and working to help them. There has to be voices like mine that can breathe some actual common sense and understanding into this. And that's why I wrote the book, Trans Life Survivors.
So when you say there weren't other voices, you did have to speak to at least one medical professional, correct?
Right.
And what was the process that you went through before they said, go ahead and have sex change surgery?
Well, the process was, I was quite affluent at the time, and I went to what was thought to be the greatest specialist in the United States, Dr. Paul Walker, who had his office on Union Street in San Francisco. He was actually the original author, the chairperson that built the Harry Benjamin International Standards of Care that was used for many years, that actually morphed into what we have today called WPATH. So he was the guru, the guy that knew how to diagnose and who was appropriate for surgery and who was going to benefit from it and who wasn't. He was the guy. So I went to this guy and he diagnosed me and he was wrong. And that's what's happening today. They really don't know who transgenders are because there's no way to objectively test to find out if they're going to benefit from the surgery or not. So that's why I call it in the book the grand experiment.
It's quite an experiment too. I mean, you're talking about certain things that are irreparable, certain things that are going to scar you or change you for life. It's not just, a gal saying, I want to see what my hair would look like this color or something like that. Or a guy saying, I'm going to change my wardrobe. You're talking about something very, very radical. So hang on. Well, just to be clear on this, I thought, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, that there is a scientific diagnosis. It's called gender dysphoria. It's on the books, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the latest edition. It's a known condition, and a qualified medical professional, psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever the person would be, can meet with you and give you a diagnosis just as certainly as they could tell someone you have bone cancer, or just as certainly as they could tell someone you have the flu. They can tell you have gender dysphoria, and it's scientific, and it's tangible, and it's testable. What's wrong with that way of thinking?
Well, the only thing that's wrong with it is not true. There is no objective testing that can be done. They use a term persistent, consistent, and insistent. The person is making that claim that they're persistent, insistent, and consistent in wanting to change genders. Well, that's an interesting way to diagnose something when persistent, insistent, and consistent also applies to obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression. So it doesn't in of itself prove that the person has gender dysphoria. It's just a term used so that people can say, well, we made a diagnosis. But Dr. Brown, everybody who is diagnosed with gender dysphoria self-diagnoses, and the clinician who agrees with them just is a cheerleader for them in their own personal diagnosis. So the clinicians actually themselves don't make a diagnosis. They listen to the person saying, I want to change genders. That in itself is enough to diagnose them with gender dysphoria.
So they say they're sitting there with the person in their office. They ask them a bunch of questions. Based on the person's responses to those questions, they then come up with a diagnosis. So it would pretty much be like a doctor telling you have a medical condition based on you saying how you feel without actually testing, without actually doing a blood test or doing an x-ray. My arm really feels broken, doc. Okay, well, let's touch it. No, I'm just telling you how I feel. Well, he's going to touch it. And then they're going to x-ray it. So that's what's not happening. And obviously that's the objective part. All right. What about when someone says, but my kid, 3 years old, my boy, he's my fourth boy, and he is acting like a girl and wants to play with girls' things and so on. Surely he's not making something up. This is not some political activist here. Obviously, you hear this all the time from parents. What do you tell them?
Well, I think it's important to understand that we're conflating a young person's curiosity about gender and gender stereotypes with gender dysphoria. Just because a young boy wants to play with girl things does not make him want, as someone who wants to be a girl or have gender dysphoria. It's just curiosity. What we know is if we leave young children alone and allow them to develop naturally without cross-dressing them, giving them hormone blockers, that up to 93% of them will grow out of this desire to play or behave or act in a different gender role by the time they reach adulthood. So the fact that we're giving them hormone blockers and encouraging, affirming them and telling them they can select the gender of their choice, we're doing this much too early in their life because they are completely ill-equipped to understand what the consequences of their decisions going to be down the road when they're 25, 35, and 45.
Yeah, exactly. So in the book, Trans Life Survivors, you have 30 survivors tell their story. So, Walt, are these people, did all of them have sex change surgery or go part way with hormones? What kind of stories are in this book?
Well, I brought into the book, out of the several hundred people who contacted me. I pulled together about 30 stories that have some who went part of the way, some who stopped before they went to the surgery and hormones, but many of them had the full range of hormone therapy and surgical operations. And then they explained to the reader what the consequences were. This is a word that is just not used enough in this discussion about transgender identities. The consequences are absolutely devastating. And the fact that we're leaving this out of the discussion, in my view, is what's costing so many more lives to be lost, because we know now that they're 19 times more likely to attempt suicide as a result of identifying as a transgender person, because it's so unnatural and so foreign to them to try to adopt to a role that was not their body and psychology and so forth was not designed to assume.
So in other words, what we hear is, no, that's before sex change surgery, because they were struggling and they were suicidal because they knew they were trapped in their own body. And after sex change surgery, that number goes away. You're saying that's not the case?
Oh, absolutely not the case. There was a study done in the UK by one hospital who studied 100 different universities and other studies around the world. And they said that people are traumatized to the point of suicide after sex change reassignment, gender affirming surgery, afterwards.
So now that, go ahead.
So they even went on to say that the headline of the story was, sex change surgeries are ineffective in dealing with the underlying problems that they have that are causing them to have the desire to change gender. And
that's your whole message in your own experience, is to look for underlying causes, not to deny that someone's struggling, not to say, well, there's something wrong with you because you're making this up. No. Look, I can't. You lived through this. I can't imagine. I try to, but how can I? I'm a normal heterosexual guy at home being a male. So I try to figure, I can't relate to it. You lived it. So you're saying have tremendous compassion on people struggling, but get to the root cause, because the root cause is not that they're trapped in the wrong body.
That's exactly right. The root cause is bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, or body dysmorphia, or obsessive compulsive disorder, dissociative disorder, or separation anxiety, or severe depression, or maybe in many cases that I see that people write to me and that are in the book, they were sexually abused, and this is a response to being sexually abused as a young child.
Yeah, and in fact, Walt, what we're even hearing now is some kids with autism are thinking that they have gender dysphoria and are a 15-year-old girl having her breast removed or something like this. And there's, read about in the UK also, some teachers and others saying, what's happening here? These kids are struggling in other areas, right? We'll be right back with Walt Heyer, the book Trans Life Survivors. You know, we talk about scriptures being the word of God. It's also clear they were written by human beings, that Paul tells Timothy, hey, please bring my cloak. You know, it's going to be cold here in the winter when I'm in prison. And it's interesting that when Ezekiel says, thus saith the Lord, that his words come out different than when Isaiah says, thus saith the Lord, or Jeremiah says, thus saith the Lord. So how do we explain that? Is the Bible written by God or men? 2 Timothy 3:16. 2 Timothy 3:16 says this, all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. All scripture is breathed out by God. How can it be breathed out by God and yet come in so many different human forms? Someone used this analogy once. When the light shines through a window, that the light on one side of the window is slightly different than on the other side. What if the light shined through colored glass? Now it's going to come out very different on the other side. But what if God, who made the light, also made the glass, so that through the multicolored panels on that glass window, that stained glass window, the light came out on the other side just the way he intended? So yes, of course, the Bible is full of humanity. It's full of human emotion. The Bible is full of human expression and human vocabulary and human distinctives from one culture to another. And yet it is breathed out by God so that we get the very word of God. Just what God wanted to communicate to us, we get in an absolutely inspired, infallible form. So yes, it is the word of God through man, but inspired by God, breathed out by God, so we can say the Scriptures.
Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us. My guest, Walt Heyer, Heyer. His new book, Trans Life Survivors, tells the story of 30 people that went through different aspects of sex change surgery or hormone treatment, but lived as the sex opposite to their body and lived to tell the story of their regret. It's important to hear the stories and get them out. Walt, before we go any further, two quick questions for you. What would you recommend? What book of yours, what website would you recommend that I give to the parents whose 15-year-old daughter is struggling with these very things? They think there's some other issues in her life, some other things going on. But what would you recommend either for them to read or maybe that she would even read herself? Would this book be helpful?
Well, this book has a lot of very good information about children in it. We made sure that it addressed those issues. So I think this is an excellent book as a resource, and it also gives the consequences, which many of the books don't do. So I would highly recommend Trans Life Survivors as a tool for parents to read and understand. And
then a website to go to. Someone that's listening, watching right now, and they're struggling in their own lives, or they have a friend or family member, and maybe they're too embarrassed to talk about. Which, hey, let's get help. Just come out. Let's get help. What would be a good website to go to, or the best of your sites to go to?
SexChangeRegret.com, and it's got stories in there. It has resource information. It has a place where you can order any one of my 6 books. And so, yeah, SexChangeRegret.com. That site's been up for 10 years now.
How often do you hear from people, Walt, that say, I had sex change surgery and I regret it? How is that, like once a year you hear from someone? How often?
Right now, there are times when I get 1 or 2 a day, and there are times when I get maybe 1 or 2 a week. But that's at least 1 or 2 a week. And more and more, the more that they advocate for people to change genders, the more people I see saying they have regrettable outcomes from it, and they contact me and say, how do I detransition? That's the term for going back. How do I detransition, and how do I get my body parts back? And this is why it's so critical.
Yeah, and just to put this in context, it's not like everyone that's had sex change surgery even knows this website exists. So maybe 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 10,000 even knows the website exists, and yet you're hearing from several a week or sometimes a couple in the same day. I mean, that just tells us this is just the tip of the iceberg. Give us a story from Trans Life Survivors. Your story's been told. You've told it on a radio show and many other settings, and only you and your wife know the pressure that you get for this and the opposition that you get for this. So standing tall, standing strong all this time, we applaud that, Walt. We bless you and stand with you. Tell us a story from someone else in the book, Trans Life Survivors.
Let me tell you about Kyle Scallion from Toronto, Canada. Lived the life that the gender activists claim is essential if gender dysphoric soul is to avoid succumbing to suicide. The only answer, they say, is the swift and absolute gender affirmation, always affirming them. Kyle, who transitioned from female to male, was well known and well respected, even became a leader in the trans community in Canada, a valued leader, in fact, and a mentor to the other transgenders in the community. Not only a role model as a trans man, Kyle coordinated and educated the training and research efforts for Community 519 in Toronto Centre. In 2012, Kyle committed suicide. So the idea that they commit suicide because they're not supported and affirmed goes completely out the window, because this person was actually the leader of the community, had family support, had tremendous amount of support, but the friends around Kyle said, Kyle, after the full-blown transition, Kyle's friends said he suffered from untreated depression, and no one ever addressed it and led him to commit suicide because they ignored the signs of his depression. And this has been my message right along, that we tend to, even today, as you well know, many of the states are blocking people from even having access to good, sound psychotherapy. So they can't even find out what their comorbid disorder might be that's causing them to want to identify as a person they can never become, because they can't actually biologically change. So it just becomes a charade or a cosmetic look-alike to the real thing. And I think that's part and parcel to why they become so deeply depressed. Inside, we, as I did, know we're not real. We realize that we have been duped and tricked into thinking that we're real, but there's a point of reality where we hit it. We hit the wall. And usually between 5 and 12 years, that reality sets in, regret sets in, deep depression sets in, and many people just say, this was the biggest mistake of my life, and I want my old life back. Now what do I do?
Yeah. And so, in fact, Kyle was not a survivor, actually, in the book, but someone who didn't survive this. And again, you might be saying, well, I know this one's happy, that one's happy. Well, let's just get all the stories out there, shall we? Let's not suppress these. Look, there are professors now that are coming together saying we are not allowed to present our research. We are not allowed to tell the truth about this. What is that? How is that fair or loving or kind? You know, this kid goes by the name of Jazz, a reality TV show, transgender, suffers from depression. Could it be that there are other issues involved that need to be addressed, and that people are looking at a symptom rather than the actual problem? Walt, we've only got 3 minutes, but I know in your book, Trans Life Survivors, you also talk about the latest scientific research. I'm not a scientist. I don't specialize in academic research in these areas where I could debate with the best academics over it. I learn and listen. But what we often hear is, look, science confirms this now. Brain studies, all this, the genetic things, everybody knows it's it's like a physical condition, and you're making it a mental or emotional thing. It's a physical condition. Science confirms that. What do you say to that?
There is absolutely no science whatsoever that shows that a transgender person has a different brain. If people will look at these studies, not look at the headlines, but look into the studies, they will see words like maybe, we think it's possible, it could be. If you look at the wording and become a critical reader, you'll find out that the studies that they point to saying that there is proof, actually the studies themselves prove there is no proof. And so what we found out from the Stockholm Brain Institute, who studied this and transgender, said there's absolutely no proof that a person who identifies as a transgender has a different brain than someone who does not. So it becomes, being transgender is an idea that is fostered by something that happened early in life that caused them to not like who they are and want to identify by a different gender. Many of these people were emotionally abused, psychologically abused, sexually abused. They came from being passed around from foster home to foster home. They were rejected by their parents. Maybe they came up in a single household. Some of them came from parents who were both drug addicts and alcoholics that never allowed the child to develop a good, solid foundation to know who he really is. And so many of these children are coming out of broken homes. Some kids have been sexually abused by a neighbor or some friend. And today we're finding many of the transgender people are turning to transgenderism, especially teenagers, 14 and 15 years old, because of online chat rooms. They get together and decide, oh, well, I'll support you, you support me, we'll change, I'll become a boy. And, they have these things going on. So we don't even have any handle on how to properly address or diagnose these different issues. If we sat down and said they must prove that they're gender dysphoric, no one can, because it's totally subjective. We know that some of them are just doing it because they're activists. Some of them are doing it because they've been severely abused. And some people are changing genders because they lack the real attention that they always wanted. And this is, if you want to draw attention to yourself, if you've been the wallflower, change genders, you will suck the life out of everybody else. You will become the focus of everyone's attention. And that's one reason why they're doing it.
Yeah. And again, friends, no one is talking down to people. It's quite the opposite. Wilson, you got to dig deeper. You got to look and help and care and love and persevere with people. And a parent tell your kids, hey, look, we love you. We know you're a boy. We know we're not talking about someone with a biological abnormality or something like that. We're talking about someone that's biologically male, biologically female. Hey, you're our daughter. You're our son. We love you. But we're going to work through this together. Come on. We're going to get in the trenches together, and we're going to stand with you until you are absolutely happy and fulfilled and whole, and give you the attention and care that you need. And there are solutions. And of course, the ultimate solution in the gospel. And with that, many other professional solutions to help. Friends, the book, Trans Life Survivors, the author Walt Heyer, Heyer. Get a copy, get it for your friends. Let's save people from a lot of grief. Walt, thanks so much for all you do. Keep up the great work.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, God bless.